Hi, everybody. This is Stephen Bennett. My guest today is Angela Fraleigh. Angela earned her M.F.A. from Yale University School of Art and her B.F.A. from Boston University. Her oil and mixed media work is a combination of realism, abstraction, and classical figuration that explores a variety of themes, including femininity, gender, sexuality, and relationships. Her solo exhibitions include Hirschl and Adler Modern, PPOW Gallery in New York, the Inman Gallery in Houston, Texas, and Peter's projects in Santa Fe, New Mexico. She has exhibited at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston and the Kemper Museum of Contemporary Art in Kansas City, Missouri. She is also the recipient of several awards and residencies, including the Yale University Alice Kimball English Grant, the Sharpe-Walentas Studio Program in Brooklyn, New York, the Core Program in Houston, and the Bemis Center for Contemporary Arts in Omaha, Nebraska, among others. Angela has created site-specific solo projects for the Edward Hopper Museum, the Vanderbilt Mansion Museum, the Everson Museum of Art. It was a hell of a show, by the way. The Delaware Art Museum and the Weatherspoon Art Museum. She lives and works in Allentown, Pennsylvania, where she is a professor at Moravian University. In addition to her work as an artist, Angela has been named one of the 4 jurors for the fourth iteration of the Bennett Prize for Women Figurative Realist Painters, and she is getting ready to be the best juror that ever existed. Angela Fraleigh, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Very excited to be here.
We're delighted you're here. Now, I'm always interested in how painters come to follow their careers, come to pursue the careers they do. And you began very early in life. You sought a B.F.A. in painting, which you received from BU. Then you sought and received an M.F.A. in painting and printmaking from Yale. Can you give our audience, our viewers and listeners, some sense of what motivated you to paint and how your early career evolved?
Yeah, I mean, I think we said this another time, but I never think about myself as kind of coming to it early, because I feel like I always hear these stories about artists who knew from like the moment they were born that they wanted to be painters or sculptors or what have you. And for me, it didn't really come until high school. And I was lucky enough to have these amazing high school art teachers who, I think back then anyway, like the kind of weirdos or the open-minded or like different thinkers kind of would gravitate towards the art rooms of the world in high schools across America anyway. And finding myself in that space over and over again, I was lucky enough to have these amazing teachers who kind of like helped pull out this thing and saw something in me that I didn't see in myself, thankfully. And I think it was my junior year, the then chair of Boston University came, and back then, chairs would kind of go across the country and recruit students from high school programs. And we had been known to have these really amazing people that would come through our high school. I mean, I went to it wasn't like an amazing high school. It was just like a normal public school, but they would turn out these like really great artists because we had these great art teachers. And so anyway, just to say, he looked through my work and encouraged me to apply, and thankfully I did, and I got a really great scholarship. And then once I got to BU, I just like fell in love with making art. I mean, it was working from life 9 hours every day of the week. And on weekends, I would go to the museum, and, it was just, I was in heaven. So
you feel as if you were more than adequately given a baseline for your career as a painter during your undergraduate career. Is that fair?
don't know if I was given a baseline for my career. I would say I was definitely given a baseline for how to work from life, from observation, from the figure. In terms of like formal analysis, I felt really equipped in kind of deconstructing, analyzing imagery. I loved that education so much, but I really didn't feel prepared for the contemporary art world whatsoever. Like I was looking around to see what was being touted as the best of the best at the time, and I didn't get it at all. And there was no real reason why I would have, because the education that I had was like primarily academic in nature, and it was really based in like kind of Western survey art history classes. I didn't take any theory courses. That's not a real norm for undergraduate education, even now. So I knew that grad school was in my future, and I was excited about that. And I kind of saved it. Actually, I took like 3 years off in between undergrad and grad. And then I went to Yale.
Did you get enough technique as an undergraduate? Did you get adequate technique to be a figurative painter?
Well, that's tricky. I mean, I'm still learning now, I'm still learning. It's like a lifelong pursuit. But yeah, I mean, I think I had a really strong foundation in terms of like compositionally, structurally, learning to kind of draw from the inside out and really kind of like deconstruct and those kinds of things. Yeah, like I love that. But that's not for everybody. That's not the way that a lot of people approach making any sort of artwork.
So in your 3-year hiatus between your B.F.A and your M.F.A, what did you do?
I moved to Seattle and waited tables. I went there with a bunch of friends, and I like I said, I had no idea what it meant to be a contemporary artist and to try to make a career. So I would literally like put my paintings on a shopping cart and bring them down to Pioneer Square. And they had like this kind of like open booth situation. And like I try to like just show my work on the street. I also like formed a group with some, other emerging artists at the time. And we would do these pop-up exhibitions before pop-ups were really a thing. We would approach like bars and not museums, galleries, like when they were in between shows, and we'd be like beg them to see if we could like have a show just one night in between their exhibitions. Thankfully, we had one kind of bite and allow us to do that, and that kind of allowed us to do a lot more. So yeah, power in numbers, I think is helpful.
So talk to me about your evolution as a figurist. Did that foundation get started at Boston, or did it get nurtured at Yale?
Oh, I don't think it was nurtured at Yale. I think like being a figurative artist is, since I've been a working, figurative artist adult, like I think it's not necessarily always had like the kind of like cool factor, right? Like it doesn't necessarily have the like, I think a lot of people are drawn to it because a lot of people really love seeing people in images, but it doesn't mean that, how do I say it? I guess it's like, because like a lot of the masses might be drawn to imagery like that, it's often suspect in certain circles, right? Within the art world.
Well,
So
isn't it true the academic art world doesn't really dig figuration?
I mean, you wouldn't know that now. I think it's like it's having a moment right now. I think it's kind of amazing. But yeah, I think there's lots of reasons for that, right? But I do think that when I got to Yale, like just to set the scene, the figurative artists that were like really well known at the time were people like Lisi Escavage and John Curran. And that wasn't necessarily work that I understood or kind of like supported in terms of the content that was being shared in the imagery. I think those are amazing paintings, but they're not paintings that I necessarily like. The message that was coming through was far more id based and not one that I, really wanted to subscribe to or kind of like perpetuate on my own. Though again, I think that they're incredible paintings. They're masterfully done, and they're yeah, powerful in many ways, but not ways that I wanted to kind of tout. So anyway, when I entered Yale's program, there actually weren't a lot of painters even in the painting program. I mean, Yale at that time was kind of known for bringing artists from all different kinds of perspectives and points of view. And the work that they were making was like really broad and diverse. So in the painting program, there were a lot of people making installation works or doing performance art or film or video or, so it wasn't like you could band together with a bunch of, artists who are kind of working in the same genre or technique.
So in that circumstance, how do you find your voice?
Yeah, that is what was really hard and challenging about being in that program. But also, there's so many voices kind of coming into the studio every week that it's hard to know, you just get whiplash, right? Like you just don't fully understand, like, well, what's the right answer? And I think that's the power of any good grad program, is that it kind of delivers on that front. And for me, I just had so much catching up to do. I had so much theory to read and, like looking to do and thinking to do, that at the end of the program, I kind of came out really knowing what I cared about. And I think that's what any good grad program would do. It's not like to create these cookie cutter situations where you're kind of pumping out these artists that all do the same thing. It's about kind of getting really thick skin and also developing your own kind of, or just kind of understanding what your interests are and then developing your own voice from there. I think that like learning what the real voice to listen to is your own, right? If that makes sense.
Fair enough. Did anybody at Yale have the technique sufficient to teach you how to paint?
Oh yeah. I mean, there were a lot of amazing painters that were teaching there. I mean, Kurt Copper, for one, is an incredible painter. Other artists that were there, Francis Barth, Rochelle Feinstein, Sam Messer. Who else was on the Mel Bachner? Wasn't, um,
Yeah,
he wasn't really my guy, and I wasn't his. But
I
that was
get it. I get it. So today, you're fairly prominently recognized as a figurist whose work features these classical depictions. Sometimes I would characterize the depictions in your work as Greco-Roman. And you're quite comfortable with classical figuration. And you always paint women. They are always frequently at least interacting with each other. There's occasionally an erotic undertone, but there's always a depiction of females without men. Is that an intention of yours?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I make the joke that, there aren't, like, men don't often appear in the work, but when they do, they're listening. I think that it
Is it
occurred to me,
capable? Is any man capable of that, do you think?
of course they are. There's an example right here in this conversation. I came to realize early on that obviously there was a huge kind of like aspect of female experience missing from the annals of art history, right? So I wanted to kind of like backtrack a little bit. I've long been interested in the way that meaning gets made. And by that, I mean how we kind of come to believe the things that we believe, whether that be culturally, politically, or even just personally. And realizing that belief is kind of just an amalgamation of all of the thoughts that we think. And the thoughts that we think aren't necessarily our own, right? Like we kind of get fed information, and that information is kind of turned into a shade of a kind of emotional or kind of structural power dynamic. And for me, I've really wanted to kind of get the heart at where that comes from, why it exists, and if there's a way to possibly change it to kind of create a little bit more equanimity. That was something that I wanted to engage in. And so early on, I created works of art that were kind of a little bit more personally, like personal narrative, but in personal narratives that could kind of oscillate between this kind of like really particular personal history and also like intersect with and kind of help change a kind of more broad cultural narrative. And about 10 years ago, I started thinking more and more about the kind of foundation of Western imagery and how that kind of, for me anyway, resided in a lot of like Western art history. And I wanted to kind of like look at the heart of the images, look at it through the eyes of the male gaze, but then ask if it was possible to kind of change the way that we see these figures without changing very much at all. Like, is it possible to see them completely differently? Is it possible to see them as fully fleshed human beings that have like functional thinking, intellectual properties that are like fully fleshed out, and, emotional like people, not just these kind of like objectified female bodies to kind of like voyeuristically consume and enjoy. And so that's kind of the pursuit that I've been following for the last decade.
Well, I think it's fair to say that those who have seen your work and commented on it have said that you don't just depict bodies, you also depict souls. And that's obviously with intention, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really interested in the kind of inner machinations of these female figures, trying to point to that anyway. And also, in a lot of ways, the images that I've created over the last decade are like these female figures that have been plucked from art historical images. And oftentimes they're conversing with other women. So I'm trying to highlight the kind of dialogue that might be taking place there. I read this text by Marina Warner called From the Beast of the Blonde about 10 years ago. And in it, she cites this broadsheet where in the 1600s, women were specifically being kind of like, it was being warded against women coming together. They shouldn't be able to get together near the birthing bed. They shouldn't be allowed to get together at the bakery. Like all these places where it's not okay for women to meet or congregate or dialogue. And that was with purpose. And obviously, like the thinly veiled insinuation here is that women knew things that those in power didn't want shared. And so this idea that like women have been silenced and we're still living with the legacy of that silencing or that urge to silence was something that I really wanted to kind of like highlight. And I started looking at art history differently and thinking, well, all the ways that these women come together, is it possible to kind of see them as almost colluding or kind of like they're up to something, like maybe they're subverting some of the power dynamics that are taking place. Like you think that they're just like sitting in a corner gossiping, or they're just kind of like erotically kind of like playing with one another's what have you, but they might actually be sharing information, and they might might be undoing a kind of like power dynamic or structure that could be really effective.
So the women in your work are conspirators.
That's the idea. That's the seed I'm trying to plant, is that it might be possible that everything that we kind of encounter and see could be kind of flipped on its head and seen completely differently if we're willing to kind of look for that.
Right. So that's a desired outcome for your work, is to have the implication of a conspiratorial and a power-based discussion, not just gossiping about things that would be traditionally considered, historically considered womanly subjects: raising children, keeping the house, what the husband's up to, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, not that those aren't important things. I mean, I do also kind of engage in those discussions. And then after having children, realizing that like, oh, shoot, like I have no community. I don't have this wealth of female knowledge to draw from, or, parent knowledge, doesn't have to be female based only, but we've created this culture in particular isolates. And I assume that's for a reason, but we'd like to think that it's kind of free will and independence and so on and so forth. But, that lack of community is, it has far reaching problems, right? One that are felt almost every day, because it's hard to kind of, make your way when you don't have a support structure. But yes, I would hope that the works are kind of seen as, or at least that they start to prompt questions around what our own internalized belief structures are, what our own kind of internalized power dynamics are, and how we might kind of like upend those.
So how does meaning get created in a painting?
I mean, like a multitude of ways, right? The ways that I employ, technique, or I guess like the tools of painting. For instance, one is scale, right? Like we see large history paintings, like we're confronted with those when we walk through the museum. We'll see like George Washington, crossing the Delaware, and it's this giant painting that's been we're memorializing a moment. In my paintings, I think I try to use scale to elevate these kinds of personal, more intimate moments on a historical or heroic scale. So kind of literally making those personal things political by elevating them in size. A lot of times my female figures are larger than life, and so they're kind of like looming over the viewer in a way that makes you maybe feel a little smaller, or at least like you're maybe celebrating this person a little bit more is some of the intention there. But meaning is
So,
created, in the eye of the beholder, right? So.
so big matters to you and is undertaken with intention, right? Uh,
Mhm.
let's talk about historical influences. Do you have any?
Oh, yeah. Um, yeah,
Tell us
absolutely.
about the historical influences that you have.
Well, I mean, I love like Dutch Renaissance painting. I love really fleshy, like really intense, like bodily oozing kind of paintings, right? That you need to kind of stand in front of to fully understand and see. Oil paint has this power, right? That like this kind of layered ability to kind of make things almost jewel-like, or like you really see, like when you look at a body, the layers of skin, and like you can see what's like breathing and bleeding below. We don't see that a lot in photographic imagery, right? But oil painting can do it, and it does it like when you're in front of it in the flat. I think it's magical. I just it's probably the only reason why I'm in this whole is because I find it mesmerizing myself, right? And so that's something that I hope and try and kind of like, you know, plead with my paintings to do, right?
Well,
Um,
a competent paint handler uh, can create a world and an appearance to a world that can't possibly exist in reality. And,
mhm,
uh, you know, let's talk historically for a minute. I think
mhm.
Bouguereau does that.
Oh, right, yeah.
Now,
See, we've talked about the artists that you're not supposed to like, but you really like. Yeah, like
well,
he is
I think
definitely someone.
he's out of favor for all kinds of reasons, some of which are valid and some of which maybe not.
Mhm.
But he clearly has an ability to make figures glow
Mhm.
in a
Sure.
way that they do not glow in reality. I mean,
Mhm.
maybe Buddha or these historical deities,
Mhm.
Siddhartha or Jesus, glowed in a way that was Bouguereau-like, or maybe Bouguereau got it from them. I don't know, but
Mhm.
that's clearly an example, maybe not a very
Mhm.
good one, but an example of how
Mhm.
painting is different than reality. And do you strive? Obviously, you strive for that in your work. What are some of the techniques you use to do it?
To create like these otherworldly kind of spaces, you mean? Or
How do you imbue your figures with the extraordinary and otherworldly and super beyond real, supernatural qualities that make them attractive?
wow, well, I don't know if I do all those things, but I like to think that you think that. I honestly don't know. I mean, I don't know. I think a lot of artists will tell you this. Like every time I come to a painting, it feels like I'm starting over. Like I've never painted before sometimes. Like I don't have a lot of like tricks. I try to come at it like as sincerely as possible. That sounds so hokey, but like I wish I had a formula. Every time I make a painting, I'm like, God damn it, why don't I have a formula? Like, why don't I know to put this underneath that, to put that on top of that, because then I'll know that it'll do this. And I do have some tricks. Obviously, I know like if I put a really intense, bright underpainting down, that'll leak through, that'll like kind of leach out to the surface. And I'm hoping that there'll be some sort of resonance or something that takes place. But yeah, it always feels like luck, like when it's really singing, because every artist that I know will tell you that like you can't force it to happen. There is something that kind of takes place in the journey of making the work, right?
Well, isn't that true? Isn't that true? Because let's face it, if you look at any famous artist and look across their work, the totality of their work, you can tell the paintings where it was singing, to use your phrase, to where everything came together. And you can tell the ones where it was just another day in the studio. And everybody wants to have the painting that is the magnum opus. You know, Picasso, whatever you think of him, when he painted Guernica, he had a very good couple of weeks. Or when he painted Marie-Therese Walter, Woman Before a Mirror, back in 1938 or 39, I guess, he was having some successive. He was on a roll, and I think if we could figure out how to nurture that, everybody would. If you could bottle it, you'd be a billionaire because everybody'd be buying it and drinking it, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I think so. But I do think the contrast helps, right? It's like there is this thing, and I was on an artist talk the other night, and Amy Cutler and Alexi Worth were talking, and there's this conversation around mistakes. But there are no mistakes. Like I tell my students this all the time too. It's like you think you just made a mistake, or you're mad that it didn't go that way that you wanted to right then. But that all adds up. Like that history, you don't know, but it's laying a foundation for the thing that's going to come on top of it that will actually make it do that magical thing that you couldn't intentionally do. So yeah, I think it's just it's more of a mindset than it is anything else. And
So do you think you ever make a mistake, or do you live into it and turn it into a success?
in the paintings, I mean, I make every painting kind of come around to me. I don't often start over paint. Like I won't, like I kind of push a painting till I'm done with it. I do have some that are abandoned, but
yeah. How do you know when you're done?
it's like, how do you know when you're in love? Like I don't, it's like, I'm not that I'm in love with my paintings, but
I've been to that movie. I know that answer. I've been to that movie. I know the answer. The problem is I can't define it.
Exactly.
I can't help anybody else figure out whether they're in love.
Exactly. And so what's done for me is not what's done for, like, I'll go into a friend's studio and they'll be like, they're just like not coming together. And I'm like, they look fucking gorgeous. They're done to me. Like, what's your problem? Or I've done this thing where like, this is like, I shouldn't be sharing stories like this, but like I've sent professional images for gallery press releases and PDFs to be sent out. And the paintings stick around for another couple of weeks, and I've gone back into them because they weren't done. And then the gallery can't tell which one was the professional, like which one's the finished one. And I'm like, how can you not tell? It's so obvious. This one is clearly done. They're like, they don't get it. So it's like, clearly it's the person making its thing. And it's just a feeling.
When you look at work of another artist or other artists' work, how do you decide whether or not they're good painters?
Oh God, that is not my job. I don't think. And I know when I see like a good piece of painting, and I would argue that like, for me, the best paintings that exist have this thing that it feels fresh. It feels alive in some way. It feels like I could stare at it or look at it for days on end and like new things would be revealed. Like I like paint, and this is just my preference, right? Like this is what I'm into, but I like paintings personally that like will kind of continue to deliver, that I can't figure them out right away, that there's like a mystery to unpack. It's like a good book, right? Like you don't want it to end. It's like, there's multiple layers that are present. And that's what draws me. And this isn't, I just realized like I'm doing this like as a juror for this prize. Like this is not a prescription though. Like, please, this is just that's what draws me to paintings. And like, I imagine like most artists, when I'm looking at work, I'm looking for stuff that I want to bring back with me into the studio. Like I want to take that technique and kind of pull it into my own arsenal of like potentials, right? So it's different. It's like,
for whatever it's worth, I think I can tell. I get a good vibe from a painting or a bad vibe, and it doesn't even have to be a narrative painting or a figurative realist painting, but I can almost always tell when it's right. And I don't know how else to say that, but there's a way to tell when something's right and when it's not.
Well, it depends on the rules of the painting, right? Because different paintings can have different rules altogether. If there is a painting, for instance, like if we're talking like in terms of observational painting or something, like I can definitely tell when someone can't draw. Does that make sense?
Oh, sure.
But that's not to say that that makes it a bad painting, right? Like some of the best painters on the planet probably can't draw in the way that, someone from the 19th century, would consider to be like the finest academic drawing. But that's not what makes it great.
I think drawing, I'm interested in your thinking about drawing. Drawing is more or less the baseline requirement for painting, isn't it? If you can't draw, you're going to have trouble painting, aren't you?
Well, I look at a lot of different kind of painting, and I don't think that necessarily. It's so funny. Because I like, I don't know, there's this text called chromophobia. Somebody actually just mentioned it, that I had mentioned it in an interview like years and years ago, and I forgot. But I loved that text. I read it in grad school, and there is something about, they make a case for not necessarily drawing, but like, the black and white, the kind of like known, the specific, the detailed, that has an authoritarian or authoritative kind of presence. Whereas like color had always been kind of thought of as wild and unruly and, hallucinogenic. And, we see movies like Wizard of Oz or Pleasantville, and it's like, it's all in black and white when it's very serious and rigid. And then it moves on into like sex or magic or, like drugs. And it's like out of control, color, crazy. And I love that as like a kind of like, that's like a cultural norm. Yeah. Like we live with that as a kind of reality, that we think through the world that way. And you think about someone like, those academic painters that like drawing is like the baseline, the structure, the form. But there's amazing paintings that have nothing to do with that. They have to do with color or light or texture or,
Well, but
So,
in the context of figuration,
well, in
how
the
much
context of figuration.
in the context of figuration, how much does drawing matter?
Again, I don't know. I don't like to make rules like that, or like any sort of like proclamation about that, just because again, that's like for me, it matters a lot in my work and what I'm doing. It matters a lot for me, but I don't necessarily know that it matters a lot for all artists, or should.
So in the world that you inhabit, it would be possible to be a very capable painter and a less capable draftswoman.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's switch gears.
Okay.
You have a considerable reputation as a teacher. How does teaching young painters inform your practice?
I love it. I love it so much. I find myself saying things to my students that I need to hear all the time. So in a very selfish way, um, it just really helps me in my
So you're
practice.
not just teaching them, you're teaching yourself, right?
Yeah, it's a saint. I mean, it sounds so like woo-woo or whatever, but I do think that like there is this kind of like channel element that happens where you're not, and that happens in the studio and it happens in teaching, where you hear yourself saying something and you're like, oh yeah, that's actually really good. Like I wouldn't like Angie in her body wouldn't necessarily like know to say that, but I'm in the moment and this thing is coming out that this person needs to hear. And it's a really beautiful, like awesome experience. I mean, I teach all levels of painting, so I get to kind of meet them at their very like earliest moments in college. And then I get to work with the students as like they're about to graduate or they're working on their thesis or honors projects. And those are really like meaty and juicy and like super fun conversations. And I think the benefit of it too is that it makes it so I have to really know what's going on in the contemporary art world all the time. And I need to know like the biggest kind of broadest kind of like range and spectrum of what artists are doing, because I need to feed those students from my lens that kind of, open their eyes, I guess, to what their work could be just by showing them a diversity of different people and practices.
What is it that you wish you could impart to your students from your own career to help them avoid the pitfalls that you yourself experienced?
Oh, I do this all the time because I also serve as like a mentor for this community called Network. And what I see, especially with like mid-career artists, and I'm not sure, the particular group of students that I teach at a small liberal arts school and it's a university, but the students are somewhat humble, they're quiet, they're kind of like, they come from like kind of around where we live. So um, this would not be the advice that I give to everyone, but the advice I would give is to like really put yourself out there. Like you have to champion your work because nobody else will do it. You have to advocate for it. Like it's your little baby that you like that deserves a chance in the world. Because I think myself anyway, like I didn't realize how much I would have to do for myself. And as a kind of introverted, somewhat insecure person, that has been my real like kind of like mountain to climb, has been to try to like kind of set it aside. Like it's not like me I'm like kind of championing, it's this work that I have to kind of give this like chance to. Does that make sense?
Of course, don't take no for an answer is one of the pieces of advice, isn't it? Don't take no for an answer. Make them tell you
Well,
no 10 times. Fight back.
don't, yeah, no, that's a really great, yeah. Because I think we like hear crickets and we think that's a no, and it's not. Like you have to actually like break through like 3 emails and get an actual no before you take the no for an answer. I think we make up no's in our head all the time. And that's great advice I got once, was like, if you're going to make stuff up, make up good stuff, like, oh, they must have just missed my email. I should send it again, you know?
Yeah, well, think positive.
Yeah.
Has teaching changed the way you approach canvas?
Canvas, like the material or just like painting in
No, we'll
general?
get to materials. I'm talking
Okay.
about the way canvas is a euphemism for approach of painting.
Hmm.
Does your teaching and your years of acquisition of student experience, has it changed the way you approach your work today as distinct from the way you approached it before you started teaching?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I am a lot more organized. Instead of just like kind of like attacking at something, or really like following archival techniques, really thinking through some of the conservation issues that might kind of like befall one as they move forward down the line. Because I think it's really my job. Like the education I got in undergrad was um, very forthright and kind of giving us a lot of that technical stuff, chemistry wise, and really learning about the materials. Um, that's huge because I think you can make a lot of paintings that will not live your lifetime if you don't. But yeah, like conceptually and compositionally, all those things. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I'm constantly learning from the act of teaching.
So name some of your favorite painters, living or dead.
Oh God, I knew you were going to do this. So I have such a hard time with this because like I love so much of everything. Um, so top of mind though, because there's a Katie Kolwitz show up right now. She's an amazing drafts person. I just went to a show of a friend of mine, Amy Cutler, has work up at DC Moore right now. We talked about this, like, I think there are a lot of artists that are really important to me, but I don't necessarily like love the work, right? Like they changed the way I looked at images. They've changed the way I thought about painting. Like Lacey Escavage and John Kern, they did that. I don't like it wasn't they're not like my heroes, but they like changed me. But like friends, like oh, we talked about Kara Walker at one point, Bouillard, Bonar. Like I like artists too that do things that I can't do. Like I don't necessarily think of myself as a very good colorist. So I love painters and looking at painting that can kind of do these really subtle shifts in color, and that's so hard for me. You would like this artist, Veronica Posova. I don't know if I'm saying her last name right. Kay Donacci, I really love. I have a few friends like Danielle Tegeter, Larissa Bates, Lumen Wakoa, Michael Bormans, basically everyone who shows at David's Werner. I love
Oh
them.
yeah, well, there's some great work at some of the galleries in New York have fabulous work.
Yeah,
Do you have
it's almost easier to talk about.
dead artists that you dig?
Dead artists. Oh yeah, for sure. I've been looking a lot at like some of the female surrealists, excuse me, like Leonora Carrington and Remedios Faros lately. Um, but I'm like looking at my wall here. I got a Mary Cassatt print there. I got I like Hernan Boss, he's contemporary. Rubens, of course. I mean, like I'm looking at it's weirdly, I'm looking at a lot of medieval art recently too, which is kind of strange
So who would you
for
look
me.
at? Right? What kind of things are you looking at? Because if you're talking medieval art, almost everything is a religious painting. Medieval painting is almost all religious themes.
Yeah, but I'm looking at like the witchy stuff and the alchemy stuff. The stuff that kind of like, yeah, it's either like heavy patriarchal religion or it's like all the stuff that like you shouldn't be doing. So I'm looking at those. uh, all
So
the
you're into the alchemy. I think Durer did a couple of
Durer
woodcut.
did do quite a few prints that were kind of shaming women, witches, kind of like
Well,
highlighting all the like things.
he has a very moralistic tone to him sometimes, I think.
Mhm.
Um,
For
but
sure.
he did, I think, deal with or depict alchemy some, and the whole notion of magic, in which some supernatural force
Mhm.
uh, alters the laws of nature or transcends them in a way that causes outcomes that would otherwise be impossible. Isn't that the definition of magic?
Love it. Yeah. I think that's what art is too.
Touche. I let me put it to you this way: good art can do that, can't it?
Yeah. I just had a friend like, we had this conversation about alchemy, and basically I think all painting has the potential, if not is a kind of alchemy, right? It's like you're making magic out of something. You're taking base materials and turning them into something completely different. It's like that Andy Warhol quote where he talks about like, he was making counterfeit because he would literally just like silk screen dollar bills and sell it for $200. And he had, like he was literally making this thing way more valuable.
Well, Jung talks a lot about alchemy. The classical definition of alchemy is a a supernatural scientist who, through some combination of means, is able to turn lead into gold.
Mhm.
So how does one turn lead into gold in their painting?
Well, it's all that stuff we talked about at the very beginning, right? It's like because I think, like once young, and I think that that is the kind of definition of alchemy. That's like the precursor to chemistry kind of alchemy that we're familiar with. But it's also the kind of, when we talk about it in terms of the metaphysical or the psychological or the spiritual, it would be turning kind of like transcending or transmuting your own self in some way. And I think the stuff we were talking about earlier, this idea of kind of like getting into this space where you don't quite exist anymore and the painting and you are kind of having this conversation, and it's kind of a back and forth. It's not a like omniscient or kind of like God-like making a thing happen. It's a dance that's taking place. That to me is alchemical in nature. It's like you're merging and melding with something else to make something greater than yourself or it, right? That's like the hope. That sounds so grandiose. I'm so sorry.
Actually, I I agree it's grandiose, but I think it's right. Um, the whole notion is to transform something from ordinary to extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah,
Nobody
that's the
wants
hope.
ordinary. Nobody wants ordinary paintings, do they?
Mhm.
No one wants to create them, and no one wants to look at them. I don't think. All right, we're going to shift gears again. You're now a judge for Bennett Prize 4. You've graciously agreed to serve as a juror. Um, the premise upon which the Bennett Prize is based is that women have not been fully embraced by big art, which I would define as museums, art galleries, auction houses. And if you agree with that premise, can you share some of your thoughts on ways in which the subjugation of women in fine art painting can be addressed?
Yeah. Well, I think we've looked at and we kind of know, and there's regularly reports kind of coming out about how women are still being kind of like shoved to the sidelines, right? Subjugated within the museum and the auction house world, the market. So I would just point listeners to, if they haven't read the Burns Halperin report, it's a small slice of the art world, but they looked at records of acquisitions and exhibition history in terms of gender and female identifying folks, as well as people of color, and look to see like what was being collected, because we see like to anyone on the outside just reading newspapers or looking through magazines, you would think that really it's all about, and kind of like it's highlighting people who are focused on identity and like Black artists, female artists, LGBTQ, and so on and so forth. But when you actually look at the numbers, there's very little support for those folks in the museum world, in the auction house world, which means the market, so on and so forth. So I think the idea to kind of get closer to, and like where to kind of put our attention in terms of equanimity, and this is something I think that the Bennett Prize and just the two of you together in general are really like kind of putting a lot of tension and focus, not only by creating this like wonderful program, but like just putting your support behind women artists, like specifically saying, we're going to do this, is huge. Because we talked about this another time, where I feel like it's a collective belief. It's what we choose to believe has power and value is something we make up, and it's something we can change, and we can change it pretty quickly. And I think by like I said, by putting like financial, like putting your money where your mouth is, basically in this space, that has huge potential for positive consequences, right? We talked about this before, that I think, people like Picasso, there's a lot of people invested in that work remaining extremely valuable, because if it doesn't, the people that own it and are invested in it, they lose money. So if we don't take the time or have the support to kind of like elevate the female figures or the people of color or the people who have been marginalized for centuries, if we don't have an avenue to do that, or we don't choose as a culture to do that, then they will just remain on the sidelines because no one's invested in their success. It's not because they're not good. There's plenty of like amazing artists that live in these outskirts.
I agree with that. I think one of the truths for Dr. Schmidt and I has been that, we saw women doing what we thought was work that challenged the notion that only men could paint or only men were superlative painters and this sort of thing. And although our taste ran to figurative art, it was no less true in abstraction or any of the sculpture or any of the other media as well. And I think we made a conscious decision to put our money where our mouth was and try to find a mechanism that would showcase the women. And it's done that, and I think that the finalists from the prize have, by and large, experienced some additional success that they might not otherwise have done. But I don't think it's been as successful as we would hope. You can always do more. I think we would hope that the winner of the Bennett Prize would go on to have as much panache as some of the greatest male figurists do. And although we've seen them elevated somewhat, I don't think we've seen them elevated as high as we would hope for. So that's a long-winded way of saying there's still more work to be done.
Oh my God. Yeah. But you're trying to turn like the Titanic or, like a giant ship around. Like, this is like, this is,
we hope it's not the Titanic.
Millennia. Yeah, no, not the Titanic. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. But no. You're trying to turn millennia of cultural thinking around. It's going to take a little time. It's a little more than 4 years or 5, like.
Well, we've been going now.
How long?
Well, the 4th iteration of the prize is going to be judged in the fall. And so it's a 2-year cycle. So,
okay. So like
it'll be 8 years when we announce the winner in May of 2025.
Okay.
But we spent 3 years planning the prize of 4 years, 3 years, 4 years before the prize started. So, we've got over a decade invested now, 10, 12 years anyway, invested in putting all of this together. And so we're not quitting anytime soon. I'm afraid, I'll speak in the first person, I'm afraid I might run out of life before I run out of ambition.
No, don't say that. Don't say that.
So, do you have any expectations as you think about being a juror for the Bennett Prize?
No, I'm just really excited. And my expectation is that I'm going to see a lot of amazing work, and it's going to be really incredibly hard to like make any sort of decision.
Well, I am not sitting on the jury this iteration. Dr. Schmidt will sit. What my experience was in the first 3 iterations of the prize was it was very difficult in the final rounds of judging to feel good, because if you only have 10 finalists, indeed, in the first iteration of the prize, we had 10 finalists and we had 10 honorable mentions because we had so many good painters who were showing up and doing well and doing attractive work. As you think about it, do you have any advice for would-be contestants?
Yeah, I mean, I think just like, please know that like, whatever the outcome, like, this is advice that I would give myself, and I have to give myself over and over and over again, because I get rejected constantly. Like, that is the one thing about being an artist that like, no one really prepares you for, because every time it stings a little bit, but you just kind of keep moving. But just to say that, like, these things are so unruly and wily, like you can't know why people make the decisions that they make. So if you get picked, that's great. If you don't win this time, it has no reflection on whether or not, like, you should apply again, or if you're a great artist and you shouldn't be, like, putting your work in all sorts of places. It's just, these things are hard. I'm sure, I don't know how many applicants you're expecting. I'm not sure what the average is, but it's just a tricky, hard thing to do. And I just want to welcome you all and say I'm very excited to see your work. So,
Well, what I like to say is that every jury is different, and every combination of personalities who judge painting is different. So what resonated with one set of jurors might well not resonate, or might resonate more with a different set of jurors. So every time we do it, it's interesting because although figuration is a wide tent, that the Bennett Prize judging is kind of this Venn diagram that shifts across the face of figuration. And some years it's really more hard realism or more narration. And some years it's more abstract and less narrative, or it's more abstract and more narrative. I mean, the combinations are endless, but it's never the same. And the reason it's not the same is I think we believe that figurative work can encompass a very broad range. If you talk about hard realism, there is a place for hard realism, but it's not the only kind of realism that exists. Up until recently, I don't think I embraced the notion that there could be abstract realism. But there actually is a subset of painting like that. It isn't the kind of figuration, the abstract or the narrative figuration, let's call it figurative realism, which is as close as we're going to get. It isn't that, but it is, in its way, a form of realist painting, I think. You teach anybody abstract realism?
I don't think so. I don't know. How do you define it? For you, what does it look like?
Well, I know it when I see it. It's sort of, I know it when I see it.
That's a famous quote.
It's things that do not exist and could not exist, often abstract features that are painted in a way that makes them look real. And so I haven't studied it carefully, but I do know that it exists as a genre. And I didn't think it could, but after looking at some of it, I think it is possible to do that. I don't think it's what we're seeking in the Bennett,
right?
but it is real. So, have you got anything you wish I'd asked that I haven't?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that thing about rejection is really important. Did I answer? Is there anything? I don't know. I think we covered a lot of ground. Maybe we're good.
Do you have any advice for would-be contestants other than keep your chin up and don't get discouraged?
Follow the instructions. That's all. Good images, and follow the directions.
I was having a discussion with someone the other day, and I said, if you just follow the instructions, life can be pretty good if you just follow the instructions, get plenty of sleep, and don't get overextended, and live in the zone, right?
Yeah. Right.
right.
Yeah. Why do we not do it? I don't know. I don't do it pretty
Well,
regularly. I don't follow those instructions.
that's quite honestly the truth for all of us. I think if if we followed the instructions, we would live longer, healthier lives and probably be better painters too, I think.
Yeah, I know. The things that you're supposed to prioritize, somehow we learn like to prioritize outside voices over inside voices. And I think that really has to flip. That's something I'm trying to learn every day.
Well, I get
Yeah.
it. Angela, thank you very much. It's been
Thank you.
a lovely discussion. We've had a fascinating hour with my guest, Angela Fraleigh. As we wrap up, let me say that Dr. Schmidt and I most sincerely look forward to being with all of you at the opening of the Bennett Prize exhibition at the Muskegon Museum of Art in May of 2025. And I personally very much look forward to seeing the decisions of this jury, including your decisions, Angela, in judging the Bennett Prize competition this fall. For those of you joining late, my guest has been the well-known figurative artist and teacher, Angela Fraleigh, and now Bennett Prize juror. She will be joined in the Bennett Prize 4.0 judging by figurative realist painter Margaret Boland and the co-founder of the Bennett Prize, Dr. Elaine Melotti Schmidt. They, in turn, will be joined by noted art historian and curator of European painting at the Art Institute of Chicago, Dr. Gloria Groom. This is indeed a powerhouse group of women. As we wrap up, I would like to give you a reminder of the important Bennett Prize dates. The call for entries for Bennett Prize 4.0 opened on April 15th and will close on October 4th of 2024. The top 10 finalists will be announced on December 2nd, 2024. The opening and the announcement of the winners will be announced at the Muskegon Museum of Art in Muskegon, Michigan on May 15th of 2025. The exhibition of the work of the 4.0 finalists and the solo exhibition of the 2023 winner, Shiking Deng, will be on view from May 16th to August 24th, 2025. And that exhibition, the combined exhibition, will then travel the country for 2 years. Again, if you are an eligible woman painter, please consider becoming a contestant for Bennett Prize 4.0, the call for entries for which is open now. The complete rules for entry are available at thebennettprize.org. Thanks for listening. So long, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.